Welcome everyone. In a few moments, we'll start the presentation. While you're settling in, say hi in the chat box. We'd love to hear where everyone is joining us from. I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that this week-long program is in partnership with the Cumberland County Improvement Authority. This virtual event features visits with local artists with live and pre-recorded programming from environmentally minded organizations and a daily kids eco camp each morning.
You can advance the next slide.
Okay. Please join us tonight, Tuesday, August 18th at 6 p.m. for Dr. Sam Moyer's artist demonstration, Process and Craft of His Broom. And tomorrow on Wednesday, August 19th at 10 a.m. for Kids Eco Camp, Beekeeping and Local Honey with Busy Bees NJ. And at 6 p.m., The Watchers in the Woods, a conversation with Ken Leap about his mural art. There's still time to register. Check the chat for the link. And today we are joined by Pam Weichmann for the first part of the Newspaper Basket series. In this two-part series, you will learn how to make your own woven basket from basic materials and art supplies. More on that in a few moments. Before we get started, we want to make sure that you have a comfortable viewing experience. To that end, it is my pleasure to introduce Maurice Peterson, who will be handling all of our technical needs throughout the program. Maurice has been with Wheaton Arts since 1994. She is the IT director, and her undergraduate and graduate studies were in fine art, e-business, marketing, and public relations. Maurice, can you provide us with some tech tips for this webinar?
I sure can. And I'm really excited about this webinar. How cool is this that we're going to be able to recycle newspaper into such a cool object. And Pamela is such a great person to do that with. This presentation is a Zoom webinar. You will see the panelists. They, however, will not see you. You can also ask the speaker and the host questions through the Q&A box. That box is at the bottom of your PC screen, and I believe it's at the top of tablets. Through this feature, they will try to answer your questions live, out loud. The host, Sarah, may be able to answer your questions and will do so through typing in the reply as well, so keep an eye on the box. You can also like other attendees' questions. Doing so helps the host identify the most popular questions. Click that thumbs up icon next to the question. I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the webinar, and I'll be here for your technical questions, general questions, and also to share some more details and links in the chat. Don't worry about going to those links right now. When you see them, you'll be able to get a copy of that chat afterwards. Should you lose connection for any reason, don't worry. Just close your windows and then go back to your original email and click on the link in the email, and you'll be able to join from there at any time. And this session is being recorded. Only the host and the panelists will be recorded. And then later you'll be able to access this recording. One last tip is regarding customizing your experience. In the upper left-hand corner of your screen, there is a really tiny green icon. And if you click on that icon, you'll have a lot of choices. For this particular webinar, the only thing you may want to check out now is the fact that you can change the size of your font. By doing so, you click on that green icon, scroll down to the Accessibility tab, and over to the right of that will be a little adjustment that you can make to your chat feature. Okay, and on that note, I'm going to change over to just touch on the fact that you can support Wheaton Arts in several ways. One is membership, the other is donation, and then there is the opportunity to shop.wheatonarts.org. So you can purchase items and gifts at shop.wheatonarts.org. www.wheatonarts.org. Also, if you would like further information on supporting Wheaton Arts, please contact R. Barron at wheatonarts.org. And the next information I want to talk about is membership, but I'm only going to touch on that slightly. Members get it all at Wheaton Arts, and you have many benefits, and they're listed here. But the one thing I wanted to mention is that gift memberships are available at all times. And a special offer for you is that Wheaton Arts is offering 15% off the pottery made from the clay that you can see being cultivated in this past Sunday evening's presentation, as well as everything else that's in the online store. If you'd like specifically to find that clay, the pottery made from the clay, that's called Ruga clay, enter Ruga in the search bar. That's R-U-G-A. And once you enter that in the search bar, you'll see all the pottery that's made from that clay. You support not just Wheaton Arts, but the artists by checking out the pieces and purchasing online. Our Eco Week partners, CCIA, as Sarah mentioned, also have a gift for those who make a purchase. Whether you're choosing shipping or curbside pickup, you will receive a free eco shopping bag with each purchase. Okay, as a reminder, this Kids Eco Session Camp Newspaper Live is part 1. If you haven't registered for part 2, there's still an opportunity to do so. This will wrap up your project, and I'm going to put that link in the chat box for you. Okay, so over to the main part of the program now, and in this moment, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce Sarah Lacey. Sarah is the Special Events Coordinator at Wheaton Arts. She recently began the role in February of 2020. So she's a new face around campus. Sarah has worked as an event coordinator and sales manager previously at Willow Creek Winery in Cape May and for the Noyes Museum of Art in Oceanville, New Jersey. She's excited to combine her love of art and her background in event planning at Wheaton Arts. She received her Bachelor of Arts with a concentration on printmaking at Stockton University. And now, Sarah, it's over to you.
Thanks for your introduction, Marcy. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for this program, during which we'll hear from Pam Weichmann. Pamela Weichmann is a ceramic artist, arts administrator, and educator. She has taught for Rowan University and Wheaton Arts. You may have met her running her family activities on site at Wheaton Arts. She received her Bachelor of Fine Art at Rowan University and her Master's of Science at Drexel University. Her favorite thing about teaching and creating art is the challenge it presents to find new approaches to understanding and interpreting the world around us. Welcome, Pam.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks, Marcy, for going over all that information. It's so great to be with you guys this morning. And today I'm going to go over some tips and tricks about the newspaper basket. Before we begin, and while I explain a little bit about the project, Marcy, can we launch that first poll? The first poll is going to ask you the age ranges that we're speaking to today. That'll just help us kind of navigate who's here with us today. There we go. And it's going to ask you if you're 18 and over, 17 and under, a family with children under 10, or a family with children 17 and under. So before we look at those poll results, I just want to note that the paper that we're using today is newspaper that I've collected from Wheaton Arts. So there's nothing special that has been done to it before we begin. And if you watch the previous video, you'll have noticed that the paper, when it's cut into strips, it's just basic newspaper. And it's really the rolling and the sealing that makes it stronger. Because I know a lot of people that I've talked to informally have asked me, oh, is the basket sturdy? Because it's just made out of paper. Well, you'll soon see, as Sarah and I talk about it, that it really does become quite sturdy. Marcy, do we have those poll results ready?
Yes, you should be able to see them now.
Oh, yep. So fantastic. Great. And I'm going to advance over here and just talk about the tips and tricks. And while we do that, we're going to launch a second poll. I'm really curious to know if people who are attending today have watched the video that we launched on Monday morning, just to get a sense if you saw that. I think it's like a 13-minute long video that showed you the entire process of making the newspaper basket. So while you do that poll, I'm going to go over these tips and tricks and talk a little bit about them before we go into detail. So we're first going to talk about rolling the tubes, and that is what I was talking about when we cut the strips of newspaper and then we roll them up. I'm referring to those pieces of cylindrical newspaper as tubes throughout this presentation. The second thing we're going to talk about is forming your base. Now, forming your base can be a little tricky, so I want to really show you and explain to you what I'm doing in the video. There's a finesse to getting it to stay tight and to stay level. The third is attaching the tubes. And by attaching the tubes, I mean basically lengthening the tubes by placing one tube inside of another. And you'll see on the video that there is a specific method on how to do that. And in order to help that go well, we'll speak about how we rolled the tubes in the first place. So rolling your tubes and getting them the right size is very important for making the attachment successful. The fourth thing we're going to talk about are weaving the tubes. And this, you can kind of see in that bottom picture there. We are in the process of forming the base, but also beginning to weave the tubes together. There's a very specific method of making sure those tubes go over and under in a tight pattern. Do we have that poll ready to see if people have watched that video?
Yes. It's the no for 75% and yes for 1%.
Okay, great. Good to know. So we'll make sure to explain the steps very thoroughly. So this is our first video, and this is going to show you rolling the tubes. Now, as we roll the tubes, I'm starting on a diagonal here, and I'm making sure that I'm keeping it pretty tight to that wooden skewer. And the skewer I'm using is a skewer that you can purchase in places like ShopRite. If you go into their section where they have kitchen equipment, they usually have packs of skewers there. You know, barbecue season is over, it's all back to school now, so you might not find it in the seasonal section, but you will find it in the kitchen supply section. And as you could see there, I added some Elmer's glue to the bottom when I was finished and kept rolling it together. Now that made the paper stick together. So here again, I'm going to begin to roll it. And as you notice, I'm rolling it pretty tight to start out with. So that end down there is tight and it gets a little looser. And that almost happens naturally, which that's really important. So I'm just going to pause this for everybody. And I just want to show you something. This end over here is a little bit wider than this end down here. Now the shape of the skewer itself lends that kind of rolling because it gets a little, it tapers down here. And that taper at one end is very important. It'll make attaching your tubes much easier. So as you're rolling, if you're thinking, oh no, my tubes are not even, like one side's tapered and one side's bigger, don't worry about that. That's actually going to play to your favor when you begin attaching the tubes together. And Sarah, do you have any questions about rolling these tubes?
Yeah, I do. So Pam, if you don't have any glue at home, can you use Scotch tape to secure the ends instead?
That is such a good question. If you're in a real pinch and you really want to do this project, I would say, yeah, go ahead and try the tape. However, when you begin attaching the tubes together and then weaving them, as you weave them, you're actually bending your newspaper. So if it's all taped together, that tape might be too crinkly and too rigid. The newspaper itself, even with the glue, becomes soft. So if there's tape in there that's more rigid than the paper, you really might have some trouble. So I would suggest, if you really want to do a large project, and if you guys can see me on screen, my project is about this big. So it's a sizable project, you know, almost the size of my head. I would suggest just waiting and getting yourself some Elmer's glue. I know you can get some pretty cheap. I think Walmart had them for 99 cents because it's back to school season.
Okay.
And if you noticed in that last segment, as I was rolling, the newspaper kind of came all apart and it started to unravel. Don't become discouraged if that's the case. When I took this video, I had already rolled numerous tubes. So it's not going to be easy for everybody as soon as you start rolling. They might come apart, but don't be discouraged. Just take your time and you'll get it.
Now, when you're rolling the tubes, about how many are you trying to make?
So that's a great question. What I did was I made a large stack that was made from, I think it was 3 or 4 sheets of newspaper. Again, depending on the size of your project, your amount of tubes that you need is going to change. I would suggest committing to sitting down for about 15 to 20 minutes and rolling some tubes, and then begin your project and start weaving. If you need more, you can always stop, get more newspaper, and cut the strips. I mean, I probably used well over 100 tubes for my basket, which again was, kind of head size.
Okay.
And one of the things I will mention here, when I begin rolling these, if it starts to come apart and if that end isn't tight, what I'm doing, and you might see it here, is I'm really using my nail to kind of go under and tuck it right there, how I tucked it under. That's going to keep it tight for you. If you just put it on there and start rolling, the end might come undone. But if you tuck it under, that really makes it tight in the beginning, and that'll prevent some kind of headaches later on with the paper coming undone. Because as you can see, we're only placing glue on one side. We're not gluing both sides.
Okay, that's a good tip.
Yeah.
Now there's a question in chat.
Oh, sure.
What size are the strips?
Good question. So I believe the original video, I wrote down the amount of inches, and I think these are about 3 inches, because what I was trying to do was really divide the newspaper in such a way that the strips weren't too thick, but also that I was using the newspaper efficiently and getting as many as I could out of each sheet of newspaper, because I wasn't certain with everything going on if I was going to be able to get a lot of newspapers. However, now I'm seeing that there are some newspapers out in the world, so sourcing these materials shouldn't be too much of an issue. But yeah, I would say about 3 inches is a good median to use for these.
Okay.
If we're ready, I'll move on to our next tip if all the attendees feel comfortable.
I think it looks good.
Okay, great. So now we're going to talk about, once we have some tubes amassed, we're going to start preparing for our base. So to create our base, let's see, this takes a second. So to create our base, as you can see, we are starting off, that's not gonna let me do it. So we're starting off with 4 in one direction and 4 in another direction. And we're really making those go over and under in a basket weave pattern. So in order to do that, you want to make sure that you push on the newspaper to keep it flat. Because if you don't keep it flat, what's going to happen is it's going to be harder to roll them together. And as you can see here, I'm taking 2 pieces of tube, I'm attaching them together, and I'm attaching them by using a small amount of glue, and then inserting the small tapered end into the thicker end. And that's very important. And then that just naturally bends at that connection. And I'm using my fingers to kind of soften that bend, and I'm placing it over those 4. Now that's how we will begin weaving around and around and around. That's the very start of that process. And does anybody have any questions about that step.
There aren't any questions in the Q&A, but I have a question.
Sure.
So I noticed that when you're starting the base, you have 8 straws creating a cross with the 4 positioned upwards and 4 positioned downwards. Does it matter which straws you choose for the base, or can it just be random?
That's a really good question. So when I'm choosing those tubes to begin, I am trying to get the longest ones that I've made. Now, as you can see, we haven't been really measuring exactly where we begin rolling. So some of them the angle of the diagonal may make some tubes longer than others. So because of that, you want to make sure that the ones that you begin with are the longer ones. And that really allows you to begin weaving these 2 connected tubes around before you have to start adding length to the tubes. Now, of course, you're going to be adding length. So it almost isn't that big of a deal if yours are a little shorter, but it will make it easier in the beginning because you won't have those links. And those links can be slightly weak. And I want you to just pay attention to how much glue that I use there. I'm not like squeezing a ton of glue into the tube. I'm really using a dot of glue. And that is just enough to allow it to adhere together. If you use too much glue, the paper itself, as you know, newspaper is kind of thin. So if you use too much glue, it's really going to get wet and start to deteriorate, come apart. So as you can see here, I'm just using the smallest dot of glue inside there. Okay. We'll let that play one more time and then we'll move on to the next.
Sounds good.
And near the end of this video, we're going to share my contact information. And if anybody needs to contact me with questions as they work on this project, I'm more than willing to answer some questions about it as you're working through it, because it can be challenging. It was challenging for me at times. So in this video, we're going to look at weaving the base. Now, I have already started, and you'll see in that video that we posted on Monday, this is a few steps ahead. And in this section here, I've already taken those 2 tubes that we saw in the last video, and I've woven them a few times around. And it'll just naturally kind of make this circular pattern. And this here, what I'm doing is really important. I'm pulling them apart and dividing them by 2s. And this is going to help us start forming that base and making it stronger, and also allowing for a spread. So that way we can go from 4 weaving 4 together, then we weave 2 together, and then as you see, then we'll start weaving 1 together. And then once we start weaving 1 together, that's when we're really working up our sides, and you'll see that in a little bit. But as I'm weaving, I am placing, let's see, I'm going to add tubes here, which is definitely what you're going to have to do. And as you can see, it starts to come apart. So I, at this point, have switched to craft glue. Craft glue is a little bit more strong than Elmer's glue, I found. And I'm really pushing down. Like, see how flat that is? That's what you want. Don't worry about scrunching them down, because that is going to help keep your base flat.
Now, when you're weaving the base, Pam, do you put anything on top of it if you're trying to take a little break, or is it holding on its own?
It's holding on its own now just because I have put a little bit of glue as I've gone around. If you haven't put glue, it may come apart. So either put glue down as you weave, which is only something you'll do when you're weaving the base. You won't have to do that later on. But I would suggest, just to be safe, if you're going to walk away from it for a minute, find something that has a little bit of weight to it and just stick it on top. Again, you're not going to have to worry about squishing it, because you kind of want to squish those tubes. Having them flat really helps later on. So after I've added this, I twist. You see how I kind of twist one over the other? That is really important. That helps make it strong, because the over and under with that twist in between the two is really what keeps it together. And see, it's tricky. Like here, I'm struggling to make sure that it goes under properly. I just glued those two together. So I'm being very mindful about those connections, and I don't want to bend those. I'm really wanting that glue to dry. But don't force the paper, feel it out like I just did, just to make sure that it feels good. And then I squish it down a little bit, and then I twist again. It's almost like twisting a twist tie on a bread bag in between every two. And then as you can see, definitely feel comfortable to put it down on the paper, on your surface. And as you can see there, I had a little bit of an issue. And I think what happened there was a little connection, and that connection is getting moist from the glue.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to happen. If a piece breaks off at this point, feel free to glue it. And if you need, to do just some practice rounds, that's absolutely okay. This is my second one that I did for this video. The first one, I wasn't really happy with how tight the weave was, so I started over. And that's why, you just roll a ton of tubes and you keep practicing. So again, here, we're going to make sure that we have it nice and tight and that the twist is okay. Going slower is better than going fast in this process. And if you go back and watch that video on Monday, you'll definitely see that this video portion is sped up. So you're not going to see this level of slow detail in the original video. And we're going to have this video available for all the attendees. So if they want to revisit this tutorial and see how I do this, they'll be able to do so. Sarah, do we have any more questions about weaving the base before I move on to the next slide?
Nope, no questions right now.
Great. Okay, so now on this one, we're going to start with, this is after we have woven the base. The base is completely finished, and we've already begun to go up the sides. And now here, oh, go ahead.
I have a question, Pam.
Yeah, sure.
So how do you know when it's time to move on to the sides? Are you going for a certain diameter, or is that your own personal choice?
That's a great question. So for this one, I kind of knew the size of the basket opening that I wanted. So for this one, I probably went around about 15, 17 maybe times. But if you really want to do something that's much smaller, then when you just have maybe 4 or 5 rounds, then you can start making that curve. So it really depends on the size of the final basket. If I want a massive basket, I obviously would have kept going flat for a while and then started to go climb up the sides.
Okay.
And here you can see I'm continuing to add length. And I will note that when I'm adding length as I'm working, I'm only adding 1 tube at a time. Someone might think, oh, well, just to make this easier and to make sure that the connection is dry, I'm going to add like 4 tubes to one end, and then I'm going to start weaving. It sounds like a great idea to do that, but when you actually go to weave those tubes, they're so long and so hard to handle. It actually makes weaving much more difficult. So I suggest that when you're weaving, you add 1 tube at a time. And as you can see, I am doing that twist in between each tube. And that twist, again, I can't say enough how important that is. When I started weaving baskets, I wasn't quite getting that twist right, and I was wondering what was going wrong. So some of our participants may be experiencing that issue where they're just not understanding why their connections inside aren't strong enough. And it's because you really have to get that twist. And I will note, you'll be able to see right here, you'll actually see your tube that's vertical and your horizontal tubes. They make these little kind of points that come out. And that's how you really know you're doing it right. If you're seeing these points, you'll automatically say, oh yeah, that's what baskets look like, and and you'll have this epiphany moment like I did, where you feel like, oh yeah, I'm actually doing it. This looks like a basket, which is really cool because then you start to really understand how baskets are made when you're working with newspaper. And as you can see, I'm kind of squishing the layers down and each row down, and that's important because if you were just to weave, there's going to be gaps, like right here in the video. And again, you're not going to be able to see this as clearly if you watch the original video because the video is sped up. But here we can stop it and we can see that as you're weaving, it doesn't get compacted like it does over here. It really remains open. And the way that you make it compact is you use your hands to squish the tubes together. And this is why using paper and newspaper in particular is so great because it's such a soft, pliable material to work with that you can really squish it together and get that nice tight basket weave. If you're going for more of an open look, then by all means keep it open. But for this purpose, I wanted a really dense, strong basket.
So all those gaps can basically get resolved as you're going along.
Absolutely. Yeah, even if those gaps are a couple rows down, you can still squish them at this stage. And I will note, I had the question of when I started and I was approaching this, I thought, how am I going to go from a flat to a curved surface? You know, how is that curve even going to happen? And I found that I actually used a mold, which was just an upside down bowl. And I tried a couple different sizes and I landed, I believe, on a glass bowl. I think in that video, I'm trying to remember. I used a glass bowl and a metal bowl to kind of squish it around. And as you do that, the paper actually moves and shifts, and it's moldable at that point because you haven't put any sealant on it. It's just layers of newspaper. So you can use your hands to actually form the paper around an upside down bowl. And that is how I started to get that curve. Now, once you have that curve, I want to point out that as I'm working here, you can see how I'm now stacking the rows on top of each other to go upwards, as opposed to before when we were weaving the base, I was really going straight out. And that's all in just how you stack the rolls on top of each other. If any of our audience has ever done coil pot weaving with ceramics, it's very much like that. You're putting kind of coil on top of coil in order to build a wall. So that's what we're really doing here. And you'll see in the original video that by going from, we went from originally 4, right, when we started our base, and we were weaving around 4. Then we started weaving around 2, and then here now we're weaving around 1 vertical piece. And you do that, you'll see in the original video, just by changing where you put that twist. So whether you're doing it you're twisting every 2 or twisting every 1. And it's a very gradual process. And here again, you want to make sure you have that twist. And also, in order to help it become tight, I do tend to push down and pull on those vertical pieces. And again, you can see that in the original video. Even there, I do it. I just kind of pull a little bit, and that helps it become tight. Do you have any questions about weaving before we move on to the next slide?
I don't have any right now, and there's nothing in the chat.
Okay. Well, I will note that, again, if anybody has any questions as they are moving forward with this process, to please feel free to contact me, and we'll put that up in a minute. I will just note that in our next video coming up, when we talk about finishing this basket, we're going to talk about sealing it with Mod Podge, and then we're also going to talk about painting the inside. So if you can see mine here, it's like a purple inside. So I just used paint on the inside, and then I sealed again on top of that. So that's what's to come later. And as you can see, my basket, it's really strong. Even if I try to push it, it's really hard to do. So if there are questions in the future, please feel free to contact me. And I'm going to put up my information as well as Sarah's. And again, I'm checking my email all the time. So if you have any questions or any programmatic desires or wants, please let me know and I'd be happy to talk about it. Even though the next video focuses on sealing and finishing your piece, I can also address some structural needs in that video as well, and when we do it on Friday.
Well, thanks, Pam.
You're so welcome.
And you can always contact Pam for more classes and workshops and me for any upcoming events. And just a reminder that Wheaton Arts is offering 15% off the pottery made from clay that you can see being cultivated in Sunday evening's presentation, as well as everything else in the online shop. So you can enter Ruga in the search bar to filter for that special pottery. And you support not just Wheaton Arts, but the artists by checking out the pieces available and purchasing online. Our Eco Week partners, CCIA, also have a gift for those who make a purchase. Whether you choose shopping, shipping, or curbside pickup, you will receive the free Eco shopping bag with each purchase. And thanks everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you again on Friday when we can learn how to seal our newspaper baskets and paint the inside.
And just one more point, and that is that you can contact Pam. We'd like to hear from you and learn other programs that you'd like to see at Wheaton Arts. And if you want information on the contact or on the chat box, or information about this recording, you can contact me, Marcy Peterson. And again, if you'd like to share what programs you'd like to see Pam do, because she's very talented, you can contact her at pweichmann@wheatonarts.org. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, everybody. It was great spending time with you.
Thank you.
Bye.